Hello, and welcome to another edition of Foreign Press Correspondents Talk. I'm Isabel Suarez, an associate reporter for the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA. And joining me today is Miriam Spritzer. Miriam is a board member of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA and an entertainment journalist for various leading news outlets in Brazil, such as Cosmopolitan, L'Officiel, Versatille, and Harper's Bazaar. Miriam has covered famous Broadway shows as well as interviewed major names in Hollywood, Broadway, and fashion industries. Thank you for joining me today, Miriam.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be interviewed by you. I've been following your work with the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the US, and I'm very proud of the work you've been doing.
Thank you so much. It's so amazing to speak with you again. And first of all, I always like to start asking the journalist how you have started your career. Did you always want to pursue journalism, especially entertainment journalism, as growing up, or did you decide to follow through with this career later on?
So my path to journalism was very unusual actually because I went to in Brazil you go to whatever university you go from like day one, right? So I actually went to business school because at the time that I was 17 going into college, I was into the performing arts and I came from a family that both my parents were doctors. My brother was pursuing computer science. No one was in the arts at that point. So they were like, you can do whatever you want, but kind of like have a backup plan, like something that you can get a job. And I figured business was a good idea. And I did like marketing. I did like publicity. So I got into that area of business somehow and pursued performing arts on the side. Flash forward many years later, I moved to New York and I came here for graduate school for executive coaching, which was what I was more working on at that point with trainings and consulting. This is like before coaching is what it is today, that everybody does a weekend course and they become a coach. No, this was like way, way before it was in vogue. And what happened was that I was here and I kind of the reason I chose New York was my long love story with New York. I always been obsessed with the city because I love musical theater. I wanted to work in musical theater. So it was kind of a way to do something that I could still do the performing arts stuff while pursuing something serious, And so about a year in the time that I was in New York, this TV channel from Porto Alegre, Brazil, where I'm from, needed an international correspondent. And they got in touch with a friend of mine who then suggested me because she was no longer in New York. She's like, look, I have this girl. She's not a journalist, but she speaks well. She knows how to do with the camera because she's done some acting stuff. And she knows everything that's going on in New York. And maybe you guys would like her. So she recommends me and she sends me a message probably on WhatsApp. And she's like, look, I recommended you for this job as a correspondent. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's for me. I don't really know anything about journalism. But okay, fine, could be fun. It's a way to keep in touch with the casting directors there. It's a way to keep my face on camera. It was for TV, so why not? So I auditioned for it with every, certainty in my body that I was not going to get the job because I had, again, zero experience in journalism at the time. And I got the job, probably because they didn't have that many options, because they needed someone that was from that area of Brazil, who was living in New York, who spoke well English, who knew how to, talk to the camera. And they were looking for something a little informal as far as like, what we call camera in hand, which is the selfie mode. And I was like, I auditioned. And once I got the job, I was like, guys, I have to be super transparent here. I hardly even watch the news. Like, I don't know if I'm equipped. And they're like, don't worry, you're going to learn and we'll figure it out together. Like, and that was I was very fortunate that was the way that I felt into journalism, because it's not something that I dreamt about or like that I really wanted to do, but it was something that happened and I thought it could be fun. And if I was bad, I was not going to be called again, and it was easy. It was safe enough. And it was like it was a respected TV channel, but I didn't think it was seen by that many people. I later found out that it was like a big audience. But I thought, it's only like a few thousand people that watch. No, it was like a few million people that were watching it. And but I was very fortunate that they decided to bet on me, and I had the basic instincts of a journalist at the time. And then I ended up going back to school for journalism because I realized as things developed that, wait a minute, like I actually need to know a little bit more about what this world is then, because from TV, then they would need someone to do the newspaper, and I would be the one person in New York that was there to talk about it. Or, can you talk about this on radio? Can you go and talk about this on the news show? So it ended up growing into something much bigger than what I initially signed up for. I think that that's kind of like where I started in journalism.
That's so amazing because, first of all, you started with business and then you totally shifted your career to journalism. And you've always really been in touch with performing arts. So I wanted to know, how did this like prior knowledge of performing arts play out in your like career as a journalist later on, working with, entertainment pieces, especially Broadway?
So a lot actually, because first is I had connections in that world of musical theater on Broadway, right? And my first few big stories were on musical theater because I knew the producers, I knew the shows that were happening. I could talk about it, I could interview someone about it. I knew a lot of the actors. So it was a lot of my, oh, wait a minute, like the people that were hiring me, right? The network was like, wow, this girl can go into like the Phantom of the Opera and knows that it's been going on for, at the time, 25 years, now 35. So 36 actually. So at the time, like, and it was things that Brazilians did not have access to, or a lot of the journalists were not even equipped to talk about musical theater in the way that I was, because I wasn't a journalist. I was a musical theater person and I became a journalist. So I had this knowledge into this specific area that a lot of my peers did not have. And that's why I could do a very specific story on those things. And I also had a website with a friend of mine that was one of the first blogs on musical theater and theater in general in Brazil. And that was a great thing because it became one of the biggest outlets. It no longer exists, but for a while, we were a reference of culture and entertainment in Brazil. And it was a good way to kind of like learn my ways to be an entertainment reporter. Like we're talking about stuff that happened, 10, 11 years ago. Now, looking back, I'm like, you know what? I did this story for this website called Funny Girl. The idea of the blog was how to be a funny girl, because the idea was to have content. It was at the time of the fashion blogs. So it wasn't like just about the look of the day. It was like the book you're reading of the day, the show you're seeing, the play, the movie. So I learned a lot from that I used today as, established entertainment reporter. I learned a lot from that silly little blog that we did, and it was actually quite good. So yes, that helped as far as like getting the foot in, but it also helps with the quality of interviews. Because when I talk to an actor, I have worked with directors. I have worked as an actress. I have done auditions. I know that world. I understand what they mean when they mean the unions or the producers. Like you kind of have an understanding of the world, and I don't have to go and tell the actor, I've done this before. Like, no, it comes up in conversation. It happens because when I ask about a character, I ask about the process that they did about the character or the technique that they use. And it makes the interview more interesting. It makes the interview more interesting to the interviewee as well, not just to the audience. So it helps a lot. And like choreographers, I had this big, many years that I was in dance. I had many years that I was in theater, singing for many years. So when you are able to talk to composers and be like, you wrote that line and you reused it at this, and they can be, wow, nobody noticed that. And it gives quality to the content that I'm creating. That at the end of the day, I'm trying to give my audience, like, you guys don't have maybe the technique to get it, but look what they did. and the audience goes like, whoa, I did not know that. And it's fun for me, it's fun for the audience, it's fun for the interviewer. So it did help a lot. The performing arts background, I thank it more than all the business stuff, that all the academic stuff, because it really is my base.
Yeah, that's so amazing because, like you said, you started a blog with a friend, and then it became like one of these leading sources for musical theater in Brazil. That's really cool. And going aside a little bit from like Broadway coverage, you also do a lot of coverage related to Hollywood actors and actresses, especially in red carpet events and premieres. After the pandemic, you covered the premiere of Old, which was M. Night Shyamalan's newest movie, and you also did the premiere of Raising Kanan. And I just wanted to kind of know, how was that experience like post pandemic, prior to the pandemic?
So pre-pandemic, I think the closest thing to describe a red carpet coverage is probably war coverage. Like really is a war zone in the sense of, you're out there, you're super exposed, you don't know what you're gonna get. And not to like make war reporting or war journalism less, but to understand that it's really a coverage that you have no idea what's gonna happen. There are people that walk down the red carpet, you have no idea who they are. There are people that, like the people that actually need, not necessarily you're going to get them. It depends a lot to where you're positioned. It depends a lot of how things happen. And you need to, if they're leaving, you need to grab them with a good question. So I think one of the best lessons for any person who wants to do reporting really is to do red carpets, because you need to have your instincts like sharp, because you only have that one opportunity. And keep in mind that I'm a professional, that I need to give to my outlet something from that time that they're paying me to be there, right? So it was a very interesting. It's always very interesting. I always have the best time. I always wonder how long I'll have the energy to do them, because at the end of it, we're exhausted. The adrenaline is like out of control. It's impossible to describe or explain how much because it's fun, it's stressful, it's a lot going on at the same time. So you end up the red carpet very hyper. It takes a couple of hours. The closest thing is like to, you know, present something in an audience, because you're so exposed. There's so much going on. There's so many people around you that you're like, I'm talking to the PRs, I'm interviewing the celebrity, I'm concerned about who is this person we're interviewing? Do we know anything about it? And it's teamwork, and it's teamwork at its best, because I need to trust my camera person that they'll get whatever they need to get, my social media person that they're also doing, because social media now is a big part of coverage, especially in entertainment. And it needs to be fun, and I have to have fun, and they have to have fun, because if we are at a red carpet and we're bored and we're annoyed, I swear to you, the story is going to be awful and the audience is going to hate it. You need to be there, and you need to be in a good energy, and you need to be in a good mood. Now, pre-pandemic, it was very quick. You would get there, you would check in, they would assign you to your position, and it was just setting up the camera, and that was it. And then the chaos. Now we have an added step, which is post-pandemic. And I had two experiences that were very different, and we're seeing still how these things are going to go. So right in the beginning, when we did Raising Canon, for it's a show for stars, we had to do a rapid test before going into the red carpet. So the press check-in, instead of being an hour before, it was 2 hours before. So your day becomes very long, because if the red carpet ends at 6, I had to be there at 4, so 4:30 the arrival start, because it means by 6 o'clock we're wrapped and the premiere starts. Now we have to get there at 3:30, because if they have to make sure that every single reporter and crew member and whoever is going to be tested, because nobody wants to be responsible for a super spreader event. And when you're interacting and it's red carpet, you have to mingle, and you have to look, we're having fun, we're buddies, and a lot of the times you become buddies with those people because you have seen them over and over again. And so now, it's a little bit longer, the process, and it's also, we have a little bit more space. which before we used to be crammed and we could be on the carpet. Lately, I have not seen any red carpets that the hosts, the people that are in front of the camera, are in the carpet. So with old, it was a little bit different. We showed the vaccine confirmation. It was very spread out. It was very exclusive. There were very few people on both red carpets. And it was interesting because this was in a moment that New York had just fully reopened. Now it closed a little bit again, but this is a moment that we really said goodbye to the masks and we said goodbye to a lot of these things that, you know, we would do for protection. So it was it was one of those red carpets that it felt like we were back to normal, that everybody was not wearing a mask and it was safe, and everybody got tested, we had the proof, we had the vaccine. So that one was like, I remember chatting with the actors and being like, this is like, we're happy, like this is being back to normal. So it's both are interesting experiences. Now I had Fashion Week, which was a whole different thing that, again, you had to show the vaccine confirmation. Some people were wearing masks, some people were not wearing masks. It was so complicated it's hard to tell how this is going to look, moving forward. We have New York Film Festival coming up. We have New York Comic Con. Everything is this month. So we'll see as it happens. You'll have to call me again to ask this question, and I'll be able to answer in a month.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that things are still changing so much, and it's so uncertain how things are going to
Every
play
day.
out. Yeah.
Yeah,
In
every
the
day
next
we're learning
year.
something new and we're adjusting it. And I think that's part of our jobs as reporters, is to adjust and to ensure that everyone is safe. Like, I also don't want to get sick. I also don't want to and imagine I'm interviewing like someone important and they get sick because I was contaminating them. So it's a responsibility personally I don't want. And it's something that I personally don't want to catch. So I think, as long as things are opening, as long as the industry is moving forward, and we can still do our job, we can still get a good content, we can still make the press. We just have to be a little bit more organized, which is something that in our line of work, it's usually not the norm, because it involves people and it involves last minute decisions. And I think chaos plays a big part of the entertainment, and it's fun, but it's chaotic.
Yeah, definitely. It's so changing all the time. And I wanted to actually talk to you about something. During the pandemic, you were involved in a lot of projects.
Yes.
And not only are you interviewing people that are from Hollywood, but you are also, in contact with television figures in Brazil. And you're part of two podcasts, right? During this pandemic time. Could you share a little bit of how was that experience of going into podcasting and keeping in touch with, the news outlets in Brazil and interviewing people in Brazil as well?
So there were two moments for me in the pandemic that was kind of what happened. So the first was, March 2020. I was about to board to go to Austin to cover South by Southwest. I had my crew coming in from Brazil. I have another person who was in New York from Brazil, and they're now in Brazil, coming back to the US now, but they've been there since March last year. Basically, we were about to board to Austin, and our year, and this team of 3 people, our year looked like, we'll do South by Southwest. Then we have like 2 weeks to kind of breathe, 2 weeks, and then Tribeca Film Festival starts. The pre-festival would start in only a week after, but like the actual festival would start 2 weeks after. And then after the Tribeca Film Festival, it was the award season for the theater. Finally ends with the Tony Awards. And then we had like a breather in May or June or something. So it was a time that we would look at our schedules and be like, whoa, like we have 3 months here that it's going to be crazy work. It's going to be great, but it's going to be crazy work. So every day, like even our breaks were calculated to like, this is a weekend, it's a Monday and Tuesday, but it's fine, it's a weekend. Like this day you can breathe, or this day you're actually going to have to work and publish the stories that you filmed throughout this festival. So, and we love it, and it's a great time. I love being at my busiest, but it's a process and you have to plan and whatever. So we were going to fly out on the 11th, the 13th, everything shut down. We canceled the trip, everything was canceled, fine. So I start talking to my editors, I start talking to my directors, and everybody was freaking out because they're like, all these events we were going to cover, everything that was going to go on our magazines and our everything is canceled. So we have the April issue because the magazine you usually close like a month before it goes to the public. So April is done, but what happens in May? Like what happens in June if this still stays closed. So at first, we did not think that Broadway was going to be closed as long as it has been, or you know we thought that this was going to be like maybe a couple of months. And in these meetings, and everybody was freaking out, and I was like, guys, the creatives are still creating. And that goes back into being someone that is very involved in the performing arts, that I see my friends playing music in their Instagram or doing something. So there was stuff going on, and I started this thing where I was kind of hunting at like cultural activities that were happening, whether it was like a museum virtual tour or a live concert, whatever it was. This is like pre the craze of the lives, okay? Like after, before everybody was doing Instagram lives every day. So I started this thing called Cultural Quarantine that was, you know, kind of a social media thing. And that kind of opened doors to a lot of different things, because one of my activities was I was calling out friends who are creatives, who are famous YouTubers, who are famous directors, who were actors, like all these people that are my friends that I had on my network. I was like, okay, can I have you like on a Sunday and we'll talk about, like, I'll give you an example. I interviewed Frances Ruffelle, who was the original Eponine for Les Miserables. She has probably talked about this a million times, but she's stuck at home. I'm stuck at home. We have connections. So I was like, look, why don't we do an interview and we can talk about your career, and especially about Les Mis? Because I know a lot of people that are huge fans of that show that have very specific questions. And how wonderful that we have an hour with you. And she did, and it was great. And I interviewed a bunch of other Broadway actors. And it was just like a fun thing. And I interviewed Carol Moreira, who is a dear friend, who's also a famous YouTuber. I interviewed someone from Jovem Nerd, David Passos, who is also a famous influencer in Brazil. And I was kind of like picking up people in different profiles. A friend of mine, Ricardo Laganaro, who is a VR film director. So that was very unusual. And we were talking about how VR became a big deal now that we were all stuck at home and we had to do things on distance. So this kind of like opened a lot of doors as far as like, my editors and my directors looking at this new creative content. And, oh, we have to do this for the magazine, or we have to do this for the TV network. And it was fun because I was in the beginning of, I have a friend who ended up doing a talk show on her Instagram. She was joking because she was like, by the time I was not even thinking about what I was doing, she was already doing her interviews. And yes, because I was very quick to adjust, and it was lucky. It was lucky also because, I was having these people freaking out around me. And I'm like, no, guys, there has to be a solution. That's how my brain works, like solution oriented. And that was great. And then with that, I ended up, okay, so what can we cover? And like, there were stories that were happening that became interesting to talk on a magazine. It was about a TV show. It was not necessarily about a Broadway show anymore. So there were things that we could work on. And the second phase of the pandemic was as life went back to normal, and not back to normal, but when we realized that this is actually here to stay, I rejoined a podcast that I was part of on and off as a guest often, that is in Rio Grande do Sul, that is part of one of the biggest radio channels there, that I was the only woman in a group of 4 guys. And I'm always there as a guest. And the excuse of the network was, well, she can't be in the studio because she's in the US, so we can hire her. So that excuse all of a sudden fell. And I started to redo the podcast with them, which I did for a while. And it was great fun. And I was like, wow, there is this whole other language of podcasts that we can do that I wasn't doing. I was focused on doing video all the time because that was, remember, I started on TV. That's what I knew how to do. So I learned a lot from them. And later, as that podcast ended up, having to dissolve for various bureaucratic reasons, I ended up, and this is one of the most popular podcasts in Brazil. It's on the top 20 of entertainment. So and also with the cultural quarantine thing, I became very connected with people in Sao Paulo and Rio who were big influencers in entertainment. So a few of us got together and we're like, we like each other, we get along. Let's do a podcast. So that gives an excuse to chat, at least once a week. And we did that, which became our podcast called Controle Remoto, Remote Control. And we each have our own specialties, so it's a lot of fun and the arguments are amazing. And then from that first podcast, a second one came to happen with one of the guys from that first podcast. And there is another one that I do with some theater people, because theaters in Brazil are still closed. We don't know when they're going to reopen. They're now back in rehearsals, but it's a question mark. So we were like, we're theater nerds. We like talking about these things. We like interviewing theater people. So let's just do that. And this thing started out as like fun projects, but it was a way for all these communicators to survive, because these people that are doing the podcast with me are influencers, they are journalists, they are people that are creating the content that when you no longer can go to the theater to write your review, how do you survive? You know? So those were the two moments. But bringing back to what you mentioned about interviewing the Brazilian television people, it was an interesting thing. After in October, I got an offer from L'Officiel that they saw what I was doing and they were like, "Look, we want you to do these interviews for us." I'm like, "Sure." I mean, I only have a limited reach, so I'm happy to do it for you as long as I can still do it for myself. And they gave me full freedom, which was amazing. And it kind of just happened that I got offered this first interview, and I was like, "Whoa!" Like, I'm the international correspondent. It never occurred to me to be interviewing people in Brazil, but I get it. Now we're stuck. So now if I'm interviewing you or if I'm interviewing a neighbor, we're still doing it through Zoom. So why not? And this was a lot of fun because I got to interview a lot of people that I grew up watching on TV and who have the same references as me. And probably like it was a different way of interview, because when I interview someone from here, from England, or from Spain, from any other country, I'm interviewing them with the point of view of a foreigner. Now, when I'm interviewing, someone who has been in Brazilian television forever, I'm interviewing with the point of view of a Brazilian, but I haven't been there in a while. So I can still ask questions that are unusual. And some people are around my age, some people are older, some people are younger. So it's been fun. It's been fun, and it's an opportunity that I think now we have as journalists, as correspondents, as communicators to do interviews that are long. When I'm on a TV show, I have 10 minutes. That's it. And I won't know all of Isabella in 10 minutes. But if I have an hour with you, like look at how many wonderful stories you might share that you haven't shared before. So that was the format that I was interested in doing, because I've done a lot of profile interviews. And when I did the cover for Marie Claire with Isabella Rossellini, I had an hour and a half with her. And it was like, wow, like I really got to know her. Like, of course, I did my research. I always joke that I make an FBI type of research, because I research everything. I watch everything that they've done. I've watched every single interview. I listen to every single interview. And then I can ask, instead of asking a question that everybody did, I was like, I've noticed you said this a lot. Why? And then they give you something new.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, the whole opportunity to just connect with people from Brazil and talk about entertainment in a time where everyone is just stuck at home. And these are professionals in the industry who are always like occupied going to the movie theaters, watching movies and doing reviews. And then also these actors who had to stop working on their novellas or stuff like that for you to be able to talk with them.
And that's the point that you brought up, and I didn't say, but it just hit me. That was the point that we had from the beginning. It is our job to entertain. People are stuck at home. People are concerned. I'm not equipped to go and talk about COVID. That's not my line of work. I'm not a scientist. I don't work with scientists. What I can talk about is how can you enjoy your time while you're at home stuck? Or, you know what? Yes, we're stuck at home, but let me tell you something. We're not going to be bored. And this is what's going on. So that was kind of the goal. And even with these interviews, it was with, they also have that, it's from the artistic world that, well, our job is to entertain, and our job is to bring that relief, because you're going to watch the news. It's going to be political crisis, economical crisis, wars, virus, all this stuff. We're not there to talk about that. I don't care about their political opinion, but I want to know about that project when she was a teenager, that she worked with so and so, and I want to know the gossip, and not the gossip in a way of like, but I want to play with them, and I want to have a good time when we are doing this one interview. So when people are watching, they can have a good time as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And I think lastly, before we finish off this interview, I just wanted to ask you for a word of advice. I always ask this to other correspondents who come in this edition of Foreign Press Correspondents Talks, to like say a word of advice in this area that you're working on, which is entertainment journalism, for upcoming foreign correspondents or upcoming journalists who would like to go into this field. What would you say to them?
Well, there are two things, right? The one thing is that it's a lot less glamorous than people think. They see the picture of, you on the red carpet dressed up and like looking great, and how to, with the actors, and wow, it's amazing. She's friend with the celeb. No, it's a lot less glamorous. It's a lot of fun. And I think that entertainment reporting is one of the most under, like it's the most, underappreciated area of journalism. Everybody thinks that anybody can do, and everybody thinks that it's not important. And I can tell you that people that are very qualified in entertainment, they're very good. And it's not everyone that can do it. And it's work. It's work. Sometimes you're exhausted and you still have to watch 5 movies because you're going to interview someone, or, sometimes you watch a lot of crappy things. Sometimes you have to go to a show that you don't like and you have to interview people. Sometimes you're going to be very, I've been put on spot, like with actors that they had pleasure on, making the reporter uncomfortable. And that's how they distracted themselves on a long press day. And it requires um, a lot of flexibility. It requires a lot of instinct. It requires a lot of good mood and good humor and good sense of humor. And it requires, it's a tricky area because you have to be very serious, but you also have to be, you know, very fun, and you have to have fun because how like when you see these morning shows and people are very fake, and you're like, they're so fake, they're not enjoying this at all, and you're like, you can tell that. So for you to be good, you actually you have to enjoy. And it's hard to maintain the passion, it's hard to maintain, the spark in your eye when you've done this many times. And I think that that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is it takes perseverance, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of going and showing face, and going to red carpet, sometimes not getting any interviews, but still leaving with a good face, leaving with the lesson of a good experience, and appreciating that you were there, because there were journalists that were not. And but also, one of the biggest things was, I remember when I started out and I would look at this like lines of red carpet, I'm the last spot, and I look at everyone in front of me, and look at them, they're bored, they're tired, they're not having fun. And I had this camera girl, who is one of my dearest friends today, and I look at her and I was like, if we are ever acting like that, or if we ever feel like that, we have to stop. Because it's not one of those jobs that, unless you're very famous, that you're going to make a fortune. It's not one of those jobs that is easy to do. A lot of the times you're giving up time with your friends and your family, because let me tell you something, premieres are on Saturdays, premieres are on Sunday, premieres are at night, so that dinner party that your friends are going, you're not going to go because you have to work, and that story needs to be out before the next morning, and guess who's writing, guess who's editing. So it's a lovely job. It's something that you fall in love or you don't, but it's a lot of work. It sounds silly and it sounds like it's easy, but it's very difficult and it's a lot of work. But when you do it and you enjoy what you do, so what? So I work on Saturday nights. It's fine. I can do it.
Yeah, For sure. Thank you so much, Medium, for just spending some time here
My
talking with me.
pleasure.
It's always amazing to talk to you and hear about your experiences. Yeah, and yeah, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. And it was great being interviewed. By what the audience here doesn't know is that Isabella and I met because she asked to interview me during the quarantine time, right? Like this was during like what no, April last year, I think,
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
so long ago.
So long
Yeah,
ago. Yeah,
and
and
so
I
much
think that
happened. I
and I
think I think I interviewed when you were doing the whole cultural quarantine.
yeah,
So it was really nice.
it was
Yeah.
really nice. And since then we've been following each other. I suggested that you apply for an internship with us here. And I think that that's one of the big lessons, Isabella, that I think you follow amazingly. That is to not say no to opportunities. And I think that's also what I do. It's you ask me for an interview. I'm like, sure, because I know it's gonna help you. I'm gonna get practice as being interviewed, like an interviewee as well. And who knows, like next year you might be at a network and might be at another. We might work together. So it's networking, it's saying yes to most things, and like, say yes. That's kind of how I got my job and how I got my career. I said yes to an audition that I had no idea I was going to pass. So, and here I am today, and I work with various magazines, and I work with TV channels, and I work with radios and stuff, and it's a lot of fun. So I think that that's something that you did that I thought was amazing, that you reached out to someone you had no idea. I could say I could be nice, I could be annoying. And, here we are today having our second interview. And I'm very proud of like how well you've been doing and like seeing your work and, especially being interviewed by you. As always, it's a pleasure. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this interview again.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity of doing this interview once again. And yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.